We have a tendency to view the Middle Ages as this frozen block of time. You picture a knight, a castle, maybe a king on a throne, and you just assume it looked exactly like that for, I don't know, 1,000 years. It feels static.
It's the Hollywood flatline. We see the costumes, the chainmail, and the velvet, but we miss the evolution. We miss the fact that things were changing incredibly fast.
Right. But the sources we're looking at today, specifically these one mind map notes, the 100 Years' War, they paint a completely different picture. We are looking at a period roughly between 1337 and 1485 where, well, everything broke.
It's effectively the death of the medieval world and the painful birth of the modern nation-state.
And it's not just a list of battles. We're tracking a massive technological shift from the longbow to gunpowder and a political shift from, feudal chaos to centralized power.
Exactly. And the crucial insight here, and this is what the mind map notes really emphasize, is that these aren't two separate stories. The Hundred Years' War and the Wars of the Roses are one continuous narrative arc.
So you can't understand one without the other.
You can't. You cannot understand why England tore itself apart in the Civil War without understanding the trauma of losing France first.
So our mission today is to connect those dots. We're going to trace the line from the glory of Dagencourt to the slaughter of Towtonfield. Let's start with the tinderbox. Why does this thing explode in 1337? Because on paper, it really just looks like a family squabble.
Well, at the high level it is. It's a dynastic dispute that's spiraled out of control. You have Edward III of England. He looks across the channel at the French throne and realizes, technically he might be the rightful heir.
Okay, walk me through the family tree there, because usually these things are incredibly messy.
You'd think so, but it's surprisingly direct. Edward III is the grandson of the French King Philip IV.
Okay.
His mother was Isabella, Philip's daughter. So when the French line ran out of direct male heirs, Edward was the closest living male relative.
So in a modern court of law, he wins that case. He gets the inheritance.
No. In a modern court, absolutely. But the French nobility they were absolutely not going to accept an English king. The idea was just repugnant to them. So they dusted off this ancient legal text called Salic law.
I see this term popped up in the notes a few times. Explain it like I'm 5 on Salic law.
The explain like I'm 5 is simply no girls allowed. It forbade royal succession passing through a female line. The French used it to disqualify Edward because his claim came through his mother. Instead, they gave the crown to his cousin, Philip VI.
That feels incredibly convenient. Oh, look at this old rule we just found that happens to solve our political problem.
He was entirely retrofitted to fit the moment. But the dynastic claim was really just the cover story. The real friction was geopolitical, specifically regarding a place called Gascony.
Gascony, right, down in the southwest of France.
Right. This leads to what the notes call the feudal paradox. Gascony was this massive wine-producing region, very wealthy. It was technically part of the Kingdom of France, but it had been owned by the English kings for centuries.
So Edward III is a sovereign king in England.
But in Gascony, he's a vassal. He technically has to kneel to the French king.
Oh, wow.
Think of it like being the CEO of a massive company, Amazon or Google, but you have a side hustle where your biggest competitor is actually your boss.
And your boss can fire you at any time.
Or at least try to confiscate your office, which is exactly what happened. The French King Philip VI wanted that territory back. And it wasn't just wine. The sources highlight the wool trade, too.
The wool and wine economy.
Precisely. England grew the wool, but the money was made processing it into cloth in Flanders. Flanders was under French suzerainty, essentially French overlordship.
So they had leverage.
Huge leverage. If the French king wanted to squeeze the English economy, he just had to strangle the wool trade in Flanders.
So if you pull on a thread in the English economy, it leads right back to France. Edward III isn't just fighting for vanity, he's fighting for economic survival.
He's fighting to secure his supply chain. In 1337, Philip VI tries to confiscate Gascony, citing Edward's disloyalty. Edward responds by throwing a nuclear option. I'm not your vassal, I'm your king. And the war is on.
No, usually when a smaller country picks a fight with a superpower, and France was the demographic and military superpower of Europe at the time, they get crushed. But England had an ace up its sleeve, the longbow.
The infantry revolution. This is one of the most important takeaways from this entire era. Before this, the tank of the battlefield was the armored knight. Expensive, aristocratic, unstoppable.
Yeah.
The longbow changed the math completely.
I was looking at the specs in the notes, and they are terrifying. 160-pound draw weight,
It's staggering. I mean, for context, a modern Olympic archer pulls maybe 45 or 50 pounds. To pull 160 or even 180, as some estimates suggest, you aren't just using arm strength, you're using your entire skeletal structure.
Wow.
We have archaeological evidence, skeletons of archers from this period, where the spine is actually twisted and the bone density in the shoulders is thickened just to handle the load.
So you can't just hand a peasant a bow and say, go fight.
Absolutely not. It took a lifetime to build that strength. That's why the English government banned other sports. No football, no wrestling on Sundays. You went to church, and then you practiced archery.
It's a societal commitment to a weapon system.
And it democratized violence. That's the key insight. Suddenly, a commoner who cost pennies to feed could kill a nobleman whose armor and horse cost a fortune. It was the great leveler.
And we see this play out at the big battles mentioned in the mind map. Crécy in 1346 was the wake-up call, but the one everyone knows, the one Shakespeare wrote about, is Agincourt in 1415.
Agincourt is the masterclass. It's Henry V's defining moment. His army is sick, dysentery is running rampant, they're marching through mud, and they are outnumbered at least 5-1 by fresh French troops.
By all conventional logic, they should have surrendered or been wiped out in an hour.
Right. But Henry uses what military historians call an offset strategy. He leans entirely into his asymmetry. He picks a narrow, muddy field bracketed by woods so the French can't flank him. And he plants these massive 6-foot sharpened stakes in the ground to break the cavalry charge.
And then just rains hell on them.
A cloud of arrows. The rate of fire is insane. 10, maybe 12 shots a minute per archer.
Yeah.
And because of the mud and the bottleneck, the French heavy armor became a death trap. They were crushing each other, drowning in the mud.
Unbelievable.
The flower of French nobility was wiped out by English peasants.
The political fallout from that was huge. The Treaty of Troyes effectively gave England everything they wanted. Henry V is named regent and heir to the French throne.
It was the peak. A dual monarchy, but, and history is full of these buts, Henry V dies young. And the French, well, they find a miracle.
Joan of Arc.
Joan of Arc. It's hard to overstate the psychological pivot here. 1429, the Siege of Orleans. She convinced the French that God was actually on their side.
Right.
When you believe you can't lose, you fight differently.
Morale is a powerful drug.
Yeah.
But looking at the timeline in the source material, there's another shift happening right alongside Joan, a technological one. The longbow starts losing its edge.
This is the tragedy of the longbow. Remember we said it takes a lifetime to train an archer?
Right, it's a generational investment.
Well, if you lose 5,000 archers in a bad campaign or to disease, you need 15 years to replace them. But then enters gunpowder.
The great equalizer.
Exactly. Early guns were inaccurate, they were dangerous to the user, and they smelled terrible. But they had raw chemical energy. A bullet hit with 5 or 6 times the kinetic energy of an arrow.
And the training time.
2 weeks. You could teach a guy to stuff powder in a tube and point it in 2 weeks. This is the big takeaway. The longbow was a biological weapon limited by human physiology. The gun was a chemical weapon limited only by industrial capacity.
It changed the armor game, too.
Completely. The notes mention that to stop a bullet, armor had to go from 3mm to 6.5mm thick. That is way too heavy to fight in. So suddenly the knight in shining armor isn't a tank anymore. He's a slow, heavy target.
So the French modernize. They embrace this new tech. They build a professional artillery train. And by 1453, at the Battle of Castillon, they just blast the English off the continent.
Castillon was the final nail. The English charge into prepared French artillery positions and are decimated. Bordeaux falls. After 116 years of fighting, England is left with nothing but a little port called Calais.
So imagine the national psyche at this moment. You've spent a century convincing yourself you're the rightful owners of France. You've taxed your people into poverty to pay for it, and now you've lost.
And you have thousands of professional soldiers coming home with no jobs, suffering from trauma, and trained only in violence. They are armed, dangerous, and bored.
And the man at the top, King Henry VI. He isn't exactly Henry V.
He is the anti-Henry V.
Huh?
The sources describe him as saintly, timid, and tragically prone to catatonic stupors.
The timeline here is fascinating. His first major mental breakdown happens in 1453, basically the exact moment Bordeaux is lost.
The stress likely broke him. He became unresponsive. So you have a power vacuum, a catatonic king, a country full of unemployed mercenaries and powerful nobles with private armies. This is the recipe for the Wars of the Roses.
It's not a new war. It's the 100 Years' War imploding inwards.
Precisely. It turns into a factional fight. On one side, the House of Lancaster, the Red Rose, led effectively not by the king, but by his queen, Margaret of Anjou.
Who sounds like a formidable operator.
She had to be. She is fighting for her son's survival against a court that smells blood. On the other side, the House of York, the White Rose, led by Richard, Duke of York. And Richard has a point. Yeah. By strict genealogy and primogeniture, his claim to the throne is actually better than Henry's.
So the fuse is lit, we get St. Albans in 1455, which is basically street brawl, and then it escalates into full-blown industrial slaughter.
And it gets incredibly bloody. Look at the Battle of Towton in 1461. If you want to understand the horror of this war, look at Towton.
The notes call it the bloodiest battle in English history.
It was fought in a blinding blizzard. 28,000 dead in a single day. The rivers ran red with blood. That was roughly 1% of the entire English population at the time, killed in an afternoon.
That is horrific. It's Game of Thrones, but without the dragons to end it quickly.
It really is. The crown bounces back and forth like a tennis ball. Edward IV, York, wins after Towton. But then the kingmaker, the Earl of Warwick, switches sides because he feels slighted.
Of course he does.
Henry VI is briefly put back on the throne. Imagine they drag this poor, confused man out of the tower and put a crown on him.
But it doesn't last.
No. Edward IV comes back, secures power at Tewkesbury in 1471, and the Lancastrian male line is basically extinguished. Henry VI is murdered shortly after.
So York wins, but then Edward IV dies young. There seems to be a theme here of kings dying young, and we get the whole princes in the tower situation with Richard III.
Which sets the stage for the final act. Richard III is on the throne, but his legitimacy is questioned, and he has enemies everywhere.
Yeah.
And across the channel, waiting for his moment, is Henry Tudor.
A Lancastrian claimant with a pretty tenuous lineage, right?
Very tenuous. He's the last man standing for the Lancastrians, but only just. He lands in Wales, gathers a ragtag army, and meets Richard at Bosworth Field in 1485.
This is the finale, the last charge.
It is. And it ends in a very medieval way. Richard III, seeing the battle turning against him, spots Henry Tudor across the field. He decides to gamble everything. He leads a cavalry charge aimed directly at Henry, trying to kill the head of the snake.
Nice stakes poker.
He gets close, actually kills Henry's standard-bearer, but he gets cut off, surrounded, and hacked down. He is the last English king to die in battle.
So Henry Tudor becomes Henry VII, but this is where the story usually stops in high school history, and the mind map notes point out something really crucial here. He doesn't just put on the crown and say, I won. He changes the operating system of the country.
He has to. He realizes that a military victory isn't enough. If he just acts like another warlord, someone else will rise up in 5 years. He needs a political synthesis. First, the symbolism. He marries Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's daughter.
He literally marries the enemy faction.
And creates the Tudor Rose, combining the white and the red. You see it carved into buildings all over England to this day. It's brilliant branding. But the real policy change was banning livery and maintenance.
Break that down. Livery and maintenance. It sounds like car repair.
It does, doesn't it? But livery referred to the uniforms or badges that lords gave their retainers, and maintenance was the protection the lord offered in court. Basically, it was the system that allowed rich lords to keep private armies.
So a duke could have 5,000 men loyal to him, not the king.
Exactly. And that's why the wars happened. Henry VII said, no more. He monopolized violence. He made it illegal for nobles to have these private retinues. If you wanted an army, it had to be the king's army.
That's the birth of the centralized state right there.
It is. He clipped the wings of the nobility. He transitioned England from a feudal collection of warlords into a unified nation under a single monarch. He ends the chaos by changing the rules of the game.
It's ironic, isn't it? We started with Edward III trying to be the King of France. That failed. But that failure forced England to look in the mirror and reinvent itself.
It's the blessing of defeat. If England had won the 100 Years' War, London would just be a provincial capital of a continental empire. They would have been bogged down in European land wars forever.
But because they were kicked out.
Because they were kicked out, they were forced to become an island nation. They had to unify, and eventually they had to turn their attention to the sea. The Royal Navy, the British Empire, the exploration of the New World, all of that starts because they lost France.
That is a wild perspective. The loss of Gascon wine led to the mastery of the oceans.
History works in strange ripples. You pull that thread of wool in 1337, and you end up with a global empire centuries later.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. From the longbows of Crecy to the wedding of Henry VII, it's been a massive transformation. We've gone from medieval knights to the dawn of the modern world.
A bloody journey, but a necessary one to get to where we are.
Here's a final thought for you to chew on as you go about your day. We talked about how gunpowder neutralized the longbow and changed history. If that chemistry had been discovered 50 years later, just 50 years, would the English have held on to France? Would we be looking at a United Kingdom of England and France today?
Now that is a what if worth thinking about.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.